much is it worth? If you haven't been watching the news lately, you're probably a lot less stressed. If you have been watching the news lately, you know that there are some things that have been going on. We've had a death, a particular death of a particular billionaire who was murdered out there in the streets of New York. And even though that has its own things going on, the response to it from the world has been very interesting. But I would also say that this response isn't surprising, unfortunately. You find a lot of people speaking of the murderer as a good guy, as a good person, somewhat of a martyr, if you will, someone who's getting ready to start the new revolution. You've got all of these talks and discussions about what's going to happen now. And you're hearing that and you're thinking about it and you're like, what is going on here? And the response again of the world, seemingly, or at least some of these louder voices, have really just been negative. Negative towards other people who've got money, negative towards just the world in general, the discontentment that they have with the world and what they think that they need to do with the world now. In Matthew chapter 16, picking up in verse 24, then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life would lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" We are praying for all those who have been involved, no doubt, in that murder and that whole situation. But here's a man who's decided to forfeit his own soul just to bring about what exactly? A message, a movement, or what's going on? And then you have all these other people who are saying, well, you know, I might want to bring my own message to the world, and I might want to target a billionaire of my own and see what kind of message I can bring to the world. What's going on here? What's happening? And not only that, but you have what we would seem to be this irrational hate. This irrational hate. You see, this wasn't the only recent billionaire, or the only billionaire who hasn't died recently. We had another one who died on their way to try to see what was going on with the Titanic. And the response as well was just very interesting. You had a lot of people saying things like, well, that's what they get, and that's what they deserve. Like, well, what's going on? What do you mean that's what they get? What do you mean that's what they deserve? Well, they were rich. They had money. They had all of these worldly pleasures and things, and so they could go down there and they could take a trip like that. And so, it's what they get for putting themselves in danger. They would say the same thing to the billionaire who got shot the other day. Well, that's what he gets because he's probably out here making all of these decisions to put people more under the boot of the health industry, and we've got all of these things going on. And so people are asking, well, what's going to happen to all of the other billionaires and famous people, and what will happen to the health industry? And now the Christian has to ask, well, how can we navigate through these things? Here we have another problem and another issue, and that some may be tempted to join along, not fully, not completely, but just a little bit, and saying, well, yeah, I think some sort of revolution does need to happen, and maybe some things need to be done, and people are trying to justify the murdering of various folks. And even though they are Christians, they claim to believe in the name of Christ. You'll find them online a lot of times saying, well, yeah, I think it is about that time that, maybe something happens. Maybe not in this way, but maybe just a little bit justify what that guy did. What's going on here? What's happening? How much is it really worth? And I get it. There are a lot of people who are wanting to show themselves and to show the world that it's a time for change and it's a time for things to be different. But how much is it worth? Are you intending to lose your soul to show just a few people a message? Are you willing to lose your own soul just to be famous for 15 seconds and to tell other people, you see, what this person was doing was wrong? But what did you do? What were you doing? So how can the Christian navigate through these times? And especially when the pressure is on. The people are looking at Christians because Christians are out here claiming that they know what to do is right and they know what to do what is good, and they're following after God. And then they're going to disrupt other brethren by using various verses that talk about God's justice, and they're bringing in God's justice, and they're bringing in God's restitution, if you will. You're already seeing this kind of nonsense out here. Go ahead and turn to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. What I'm offering and what we're offering this morning is a reminder of what you're putting up. When we fall into the things of the world, we are putting our souls up for just danger. When we say, I want to follow along with the world, or I want to think like them, I want to respond like them, I want to do things like them, we are putting our souls up for forfeit, for danger. While we're deceiving ourselves, we're thinking that we're doing something for the world, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of cases and times where we think, well, yes, I've got to be an activist here, and I've got to be an activist there, but these are the things, these are the times where the Christian really has to stop and focus on what the Lord has to say. Let's first take a second to remember that Jesus had some of his own activists, if you will, on his own team. He had some zealots, he had some other folks, he had James and John, who were called to be sons of thunder, who were ready to show their own things of what they were trying to do. And yet, multiple times you find Jesus pointing them to just following after him. And so this is how the Christian is going to get through these things. And this is not only how the Christian can get through these things, but this is how we can encourage those other people who are going through these things as well. Or saying, well, listen, I think we need to do something. I think we've got to do something about all of this stuff. What are we to do? And what are your thoughts on it? And what we're doing this morning is we're going to talk about what the Christian and how the Christian ought to respond. First and foremost, the Christian must remember that irrational, unjustified hate will not produce justice. Irrational, unjustified hate will not produce justice. And I say this because when you're really looking at it, you keep hearing this, well, it's because they're billionaires. And then you're like, okay, so wait a minute, let's take away $1. Okay, just humor me, let's take away $1. Now they're a millionaire. They're back to being a millionaire. Do they deserve death then? Well, being close to $1 billion is the problem. Okay, let's take away 100 million. Let's take away 300 million. Let's take away 500 million. Say, now you have $500 million. Do you deserve death then? And there are some people who will say, yes, oh yeah, they do, because they still have a lot of money. Okay, let's take away even more money now. Okay, you take away 400 million. You've got $100 million. Everybody wants $100 million. That sounds like a great life, right? You say, would you deserve death then? Do you deserve to be hated when you die then? Some people, of course, would say yes, but then a lot of people will stop and say, well, I don't know. Okay, let's keep taking away the money, and you tell me when it is okay to hate and say that these people deserve the kind of deaths that they died. Irrational, unjustified hate will not produce justice. And in fact, James says it another way in James chapter 1, picking up in verse 19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Verse 20, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That's what the Christian must remember. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And so people are saying, well, listen, I want something to be done. I think something needs to be done. We need to activate. We need to respond. We need to do this. Well, hold on now. Are you doing this all out of anger? And all of that anger is producing all of this unrighteous hate and all of this unjustified animosity? And you think that's going to produce the righteousness of God? Let's be serious here, folks. Let's think about God. Let's put him first. And this is where the person needs to stop, because obviously, and a lot of times, what you'll find is anger is the driving force behind these things. And this is why anger must be answered first. Must be answered first. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Period. I love this verse. You know why I love this verse? Because even in my own life, in my own thinking, in my own ways of thinking, I'm going to establish justice on the earth and yada, yada, yada. Some of y'all know that story with the LOD. I don't need to bring all of that up. But I remember reading this verse and thinking, man, I really want to do something in this world, but I'm stopping and I'm realizing that I've just got a lot of anger built up. And I've got this anger that I feel like this world has got this anger as well that they've got pent up, and we just really got to show it. We got to tell people. We got to let them know. But this verse stops you in your tracks. Because if you're a Christian, if you're serious about what God has to say, then you realize that your anger does nothing but evil and wrong. You don't know how to handle your anger. You don't know what to do with it. And we're always tempted to do evil things when we're angry. Look at the world and ask yourself, you know that this is the case. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. What's going to help though? You back that up to verse 19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear. Slow down. Slow down. Slow to speak. Slow to anger. Before you think it's time to respond for the new revolution, to do all of these things, slow down. Listen. Listen. Get a hold of yourself first. So whether you're struggling with that or if you know someone else who's struggling with that, the first things, brethren, that we have to respond to is the anger that's behind the actions that they're wanting to take. Because that's always, it seems to be just the driving force to do the evil out here in the world. A rational, unjustified hate does not produce the righteousness of God. And one ought to slow down first. Now we get it. Because a lot of times they think that they're justified because they believe that they're standing up for the little guy. They're saying, well, listen here, okay? I think I'm standing up for the little person. I think I'm standing up for the poor person. That's why I think it's okay to get rid of all of these rich people. That's why I think it's okay to do whatever to all of these rich folks, you know, and to just rob them and to do all of these terrible things. I'm justifying that because I think by doing all of those evil things, I'm standing up for the little guy. As if somehow if all the billionaires disappeared, that means all the money that they have will go to the poor or something like that. I don't know what they're thinking. But here's something that a Christian also needs to be reminded of, and you don't have to turn there, but I'll read this for you in Leviticus 19 and verse 15. When it comes to the justice of God, people need to remember this. And I know this country does a lot of raising up the little guy. You know, hey, like, yeah, you got to root for the little guy. You got to root for the guy who's, you know, he's under some trouble. He's under those things. But check this out. Leviticus 19 and verse 15, he says, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. If the Christian is thinking about, well, wait a minute, I've got to stand up for the little guy, and that means doing evil, well, now you've done completely wrong. When it comes to God, when it comes to doing the justice of God, you must be fair, period. Period. So we're calling hate when we see hate. We're calling murder when we see murder. We're calling wrong when we see wrong. That's it. And again, and you might want to think, well, what about the little guy? He says here, you shall not be partial to the poor. Because when the poor do wrong, it's wrong, period. When the rich do wrong, it's wrong, period. That's what he's saying here. You don't try to twist it or make it something else for whoever else. That's not how it works. That's not the justice of God at all. He's consistent here. And so if the Christian is really thinking about bringing justice into the world and you're thinking about God at the same time, you better make sure it's consistent. And it's not filled with anger. Turn now to 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. After realizing, no doubt, that the first things we have to deal with is anger. And understanding that our unjustified hate does not produce the righteousness of God, but true fairness does at all times, every time. Here we must realize as well how the Christian should continue to respond. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, we find where Paul is telling Timothy, hey, teach the truth. Teach the truth. Plain and simple. Picking up in verse 3, he says, if anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the teaching that accords with godliness. This teaching must accord with godliness, not hate, not activism, not revolutionary, not unjustified this, not unjustified that. It must be accord with godliness. Period. He's saying if it's not in accord with godliness, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. He has an unhealthy craving. An unhealthy craving for controversy and for quarrels about words, which produce envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions, and constant friction among people who are depraved in mind and deprived of the truth, imagining that godliness is a means of gain. And Paul is going to speak more about that. But first and foremost, brethren, we have to realize from this that the Christian's response must be to just teach the truth. There is always going to be a temptation with what's going out there in the world to twist the truth just a little bit to fit what I'm going through, to fit what I think the little person's going through, and to apply it to our lives now. And no. Teach the truth, period. That's the answer. There's always going to be temptations to change it, according to what we're going through, according to what we're seeing, according to what we are experiencing. But truth is steady. Truth is consistent. Truth is fair. Truth is the standard. Jesus is the truth. The teaching, of course, that we have to be teaching these folks must accord with godliness. Plain and simple. And so for those who you might know of who may be tempted to think, well, now is the time to act, now is the time to do these things, you remind them, well, wait a minute, is this leading to godliness? Because if it's not, you're going somewhere else. Is this leading to Christ? Because if it's not, you're doing something else. Is this leading to heaven? Because if it's not, you're going in a wrong direction. And let's also be reminded of how all of these things bring in other things: controversy, quarrels about words, envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions, a constant friction between these people who are depraved in mind and deprived of the truth. He's saying you would always find misery loves company, and so these people who feel so miserable about the world are going to find other people who feel miserable about the world, and then they're just all going to get together and think that by their anger they're going to produce something that they think the world needs to see, but it's going to do nothing but produce more evil. What we teach instead is what accords with godliness. What God has to say, how God feels, what God wants us to do, what he tells us to do. Plain and simple. And when the Christian does that, we are showing them once more that God is consistent here. That it doesn't matter what is going on out there in the world, you are to remain pure. You are to remain like God. You are to have your eyes fixed on Jesus, on that path. Nowhere else. No one else. There's a lot that's going to go on in this world, brethren. We know that. It's not going to get better. It's not going to get super duper worse. It's going to be all of these things in between. Who knows what it's going to be. But we know how we ought to be. And that's the point. We know that the only things we're teaching are the things that accord with godliness. And the things that are seeking for anger and dissensions and envy and slander, evil suspicions. Isn't that just what you hear more and more of? Evil suspicions. That's what's being taught. And the people who keep bringing those things up, we need to be reminded, are people who are just depraved in mind and deprived of the truth. Don't waste your time on evil suspicions. Don't waste your time on slandering and dissensions. Seek for the things of godliness. What we also find here in this very context is to stay content. Is to stay content and don't love money. And in verse 6 he says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. And he reminds people of this, and it's so funny, but I get it. It's funny because We don't always live like this, but it's a very good reminder. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. I remember helping, and I think I've told you all this before, helping one of my elders back there in North Boulevard in Tampa, Florida. And they had about maybe 5 different, now I get it, you know, they're older and they gathered a lot of stuff. They've been to different countries and stuff. I get it. You want to keep a lot of that stuff. But as they were getting older, and we went to one storage unit, then we went to another storage unit, then we went to another storage unit, and when we got to the 4th one, I started asking questions. I'm like, are you sure you need all this stuff? What's going to happen to all this? And he said it. He's like, listen, when my son takes this, he's going to just sell it. No, we don't need it. He's like, no, I understand. It's not going to last. It's not really anything. My son's just going to sell all of this stuff, and we're just holding it until then. We're not holding it because we think all of this stuff is super precious, but we think that, you know, he might get some money out of it, and that's pretty much it. But brethren, that's the reminder that people need, that we need as well. We brought nothing into this world. We're not going to take anything out of it. You might have 4 storage units, but do you need it? Do you need it? We know that we don't. As Paul continues to remind him here, he says, but if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. And I get it. Like, you know, as an American, you're like, what about a house? What about a car? I think I need a dog. I think I need all these other things. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. And brethren, what I would offer to you is this is not just a warning for the rich. Though the rich indeed are being warned here and being recognized, like, hey, when you keep seeking more and more things, you're just setting yourself up for disaster because you're just wanting to attach yourself more and more to this world. But this is also a warning to those who don't have anything, because if you don't have anything and you're looking at people who do have something, you might get a little bit tempted to think, I need that. I want that. And I don't like that they have that. And now I think I need to do something about it to get it. The warning is not just to the rich, it's to everybody. Do not sit up here and be so in love with money that you're going to be tempted to do something that you know is against God and against Christ. It is a craving, he says, that will cause you to wander away from the faith and pierce yourself with many pains. I want to stay here on this earth. That's why he's making that comparison. You're going to leave here. You're not going to take anything out here. But when you're so in love with money, what you're wanting to do is you're trying to attach yourself to this earth. Hook me down. Anchor me to this world. Say, don't do that. And so while the people are out here, the people of this day are out here thinking in their minds, hey, I'm standing up for the little guy. What they're really also doing, whether they're not thinking about it or not, is they have this strange desire and craving for money as well. And even if it's not money for themselves, if it's money for somebody else, it is because they place money at such a high value that they think, well, listen, if I give it to somebody else, then their life is going to have even greater value. And so now they're just basing the value of life on how much a person has, instead of course, them following after God. The temptation is always going to be there, but this is why the Christian must respond with contentment. Hey, I'm good. Hey, we're good. Okay? We don't need all of these things. The temptation is always to say, well, I think I need more. I think I should get some more pains. I've got 50 already. Maybe a 51st will be enough. But it's just going to go more and more and more. You see, it's not going to stop. You know this. We all do. And though we get it that people want to stand for the little God, that does not mean you need to turn this craving into doing evil. Lastly, go ahead and turn to Matthew 25. Matthew 25. As we remind the Christian, our brethren, how we ought to respond and how one ought to be content with this world, let's be reminded of the only things that God is looking for. After Jesus is telling this parable of these various servants who've been given these various amount of talents, 1 and 2 and 5, he says to this one who had 2, verse 23, his master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." What did Jesus not say? "Well done, my activist. Well done, my rich person. Well done, my doer of evil to justify the ends of the ends." What does he say? Well done, good and faithful. That's it. That's what Jesus is looking for. That's that contentment, you see? Be content with just being good and faithful. I get it. There are a lot of things, especially if we allow our imaginations, we can do so much, we can do all. We get it. But you need to be content with being good and faithful. And brethren, if we're not, and if we're running into people, we've got some friends, some family, some other Christian brethren who we know are being tempted by all of the things going on in this world, if we know these are the verses, we show them and we encourage them. This is what God is seeking after. Remember, this man here who was given these 2 talents wasn't given 5, he was given just 2. And he did with it what he was supposed to do. And you see his blessing. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Do with what you have. Don't think, well, we need all of these other resources and we need all of these other people's resources and we need to find something to do to get all of these. Do with what you have. Be content on just being good and faithful. And brethren, if we do that, we have done what we were supposed to do. We would have helped a lot of people in turning to love instead of hating each other, thinking that their evil deeds would bring about the righteousness of God. Not only do we need to be asking this question, but of course the world needs to be asking this question as well. How much is it worth? How much is it worth? Jesus over and over and over again will tell you that your soul is worth everything. Period. Everything. It is the most valuable thing that you ought to value. You can have the whole world and guess what? You lose your soul, you've lost everything. It doesn't matter. How much is it worth? How much is it worth? Brethren, I understand that those aren't the only things that we're struggling with. There are other things that we struggle with as well on this earth, especially as we continue to live here and engage with other people, engage with our bosses, engage with other Christians, engage with other things. Ask that question. Remember that question. How much is it worth? When I'm tempted to get angry, how much is it worth? Is it worth losing my soul? Is it worth losing my friendship? Is it worth losing my fellowship? How much is it worth? When I'm tempted to think, well, man, I got to get out here and I've got to do some other stuff, how much is it worth? Your soul is of the highest value. And God doesn't want you doing anything against your soul. Do you understand? How much is it worth? Nothing is worth putting your soul in danger. So always look towards the things that secure your soul in Christ. That's what we're looking for. That's the plan. But if you know things are going on in your life, things are happening, and you feel as if that your soul is not as secure, let's get it secure. If you feel as if, and if you know as if, listen, I got some things going on, and I'm making some compromises. Let's get those things out the way. Let's confess our sins to a faithful God who will forgive us and help us to walk closer to Him every day. If there is anything, my brethren, that you know of that is putting your soul in danger, let it be known now as we stand and as we sing together.